Bennett Mortensen is the founder of BAM Innovations and a licensing specialist in the BYU Tech Transfer Office. Does anybody know what technology transfer means? Pop quiz. Well, you're going to learn a little bit more about that. Technology transfer is a whole industry where universities that do research try to commercialize that research. So they'll share that research with students and other people to help them try to turn it into a business somehow. So that's what Bennett does in his day job. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in engineering from BYU and previously worked for Union Pacific Railroad. Bennett is skilled in research and development, manufacturing processes, and product design. He's always working to find clever solutions to problems both large and small. Bennett and his wife Haley grew up on a cattle ranch in Florida, and they're expecting their first baby next month and currently live in Santa Quinn, Utah. So please welcome Bennett Mortensen.
Okay, so I was hoping today could be pretty open-ended. So as I'm talking, if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, you want to circle back to something, just raise your hand. We can talk about it in more depth. But to start, I wanted to talk about my business, BAM Innovation, and then we'll talk about BYU and the tech transfer, and then talk a little bit about my story and how I got to this point. So BAM Innovation, what we do is we specialize in product development and kind of the initial production setup for small businesses. And specifically, we're targeting businesses who are undercapitalized or who don't have enough capital just to pay an engineering firm to do the work for them outright. So kind of the reason that I chose this business model was in school, I had a lot of ideas, but I didn't have any money, right? And so everything that I wanted to do, I couldn't really fund, I couldn't really get it off the ground. And then as I've gone through my career, I've realized that that's a huge hurdle that can just be so hard to overcome as a small business. And so I wanted to provide a service and be tied into the revenue stream of a business by basically licensing my intellectual property, my work to the company early on for very little money. So structure of the business, who here has a product-based business idea? I'm sure somebody does. Nobody. Down? Okay. What's kind of your product that you want to make? Video games, okay? So a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but a good example. So let's say you wanted to make video games, but you didn't have the technical expertise to do it, but you feel like you still have a really good idea for the concept of a game. You could come to BAM Innovation and you would say, hey, Bennett, this is the game that I want to make, right? And I'd say, okay, let's take a look at that. I think that'll take maybe a year to develop, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to partner with you. So you're going to tie me into the back end of your revenue stream. So maybe 2% of all future gross revenues of your company are going to get diverted to BAM Innovation. Up front, I need you to pay for any kind of prototyping materials, right? So if we need a CPU, if we need any kind of hardware associated with the project, you're going to pay for that up front. And then you're going to pay me a monthly stipend to just kind of grease the wheels as I need to maybe bring in equipment to focus specifically on your project. Usually that stipend is somewhere between $0 to $1,000 a month, depending on what your budget is and what you can, reasonably accommodate at this moment in time. So that might give you a path to success versus spending, how much do you think it would cost just to pay a group of developers to develop a video game outright?
Between 10,000 and 100,000.
Right. So we might get a year into it and you would have spent maybe a tenth of that, right? And have a video game that can now go to market. So that's kind of the structure of the business. And it's been working out pretty well so far. As you can imagine, since I defer a lot of those payments until the product and company starts making money, I wouldn't call myself an overwhelming success at this point, but we do have several products that are launched or in the process of being launched and a whole list of clients that I'm working with to try to spin out those companies. So does all that make sense? At least conceptually what I do as a business? Okay, any questions about any of that? Okay. Yeah.
What's one of your current projects that you're excited about?
Yeah, so the one that I'm most excited right now is a medical device. So laser hair removal or tattoo removal uses a laser. And as part of that procedure, they blow really cold air on the area that's going to have the procedure done to it to mitigate any damage to the deep tissue, right, so the muscle, and just kind of keep everything really superficial. So I've partnered with a business who's developing one of these chiller units to blow that cold air. We've been working for a year and a half, almost 2 years now in the development of the project. I actually just had a call right before this meeting today talking about some problems in the manufacturing that we're going to work through, giving them some direction on how we want it assembled. And so we have all of the design done, we have the supply chain set up, we have suppliers for all of our components, we have it handed off to an assembly team who's going to do the final assembly and ramp up for mass manufacturing. We have drawings, bill of material, like very excited about this one because it's really, really close to the finish line, and the price tag on this equipment is going to be somewhere between $7,000 to $10,000 a unit. So it's a little bit higher price tag compared to some of my other projects. So if this can get rolling and get selling, I'm tied into the back end, right? So I'm super invested and super excited for this product to take off. Hopefully I can come back a year from now and be like, I was gonna be a success, now I'm really successful, right? Let's talk more about that. So that's the one I'm probably the most excited about. Okay. And then all of this kind of involves intellectual property. So let's talk a little bit about BYU and the Tech Transfer Office and kind of how what I do at BAM Innovation is related to what's going on at Tech Transfer. So like we talked about, tech transfer revolves around the intellectual property that's developed at the university. So typically what that process will look like is you'll have a researcher who's doing research on something. And we cover the entire university at BYU, so it really doesn't matter what they're looking at. If they have a good idea, then they disclose that information to the tech transfer office. We look at it and we determine, is there an IP strategy that we could use for this? Can we file for a patent? Can we file for a trademark? Maybe a copyright? Maybe it's a trade secret. Maybe we're developing some software, right? So we're just not going to publish that software publicly. And then once we have an IP strategy in place, we then look for opportunities to commercialize that technology. And then the revenue from it is shared between the university and the researcher and a couple other places. So what I do led directly to me getting my job at BYU. So maybe we'll take a few more steps back and maybe talk about my journey and how I ended up here. Entrepreneurship, like you all know, it's not something that just happens one day. You don't wake up one day and you're like, all right, today I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Typically, it's a lifelong journey. So as was mentioned, I grew up on a ranch. Who here comes from an agricultural background? Show of hands. 2 people from Utah come from an agricultural background. There we go. There's a few more. Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's what I was expecting, but maybe we're a little shy today. That's okay. So I grew up on a ranch. Loved growing up on a ranch. I grew up on the Deseret Cattle and Citrus Ranch in, I almost said Utah, in Florida. Yeah, in Florida. It's one of the largest ranches in the United States. I believe it's 300,000 acres and about 44,000 mother cows. Just a fun fact. There's another ranch that was just purchased by the church up in North Florida that's 400,000 acres that they're getting ready to put cattle on here in the next couple of years. So huge operation. And I loved growing up on the ranch. We had lots of fun opportunities, right? You get to ride horses, chase cattle. We had hogs. We did a lot of hog hunting, jumping on gators, all that type of fun stuff. And we really learned how to work from a young age. So from the time that I was 12, every summer break, spring break, Christmas break, whatever it was, I had a job lined up that I was working on the ranch, either chasing cattle or working in plumbing. I did housing, I did water maintenance, right? So lots of different opportunities. And my senior year of high school, me and my buddy actually started a fencing company where we built, I think it was something like 40 or 50 miles of fence in a summer, just the 2 of us. So that paid for our church mission. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints served a church mission. So that paid for the mission and the first 3 or 4 years of school, which was great, right? Because school's expensive, as we all know. So learned how to work, but honestly, my interests weren't really in agriculture. Really loved that space, loved the people in that space, but I was interested in more technical things, more engineering related. So went to BYU, got my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. Loved the engineering side of it, but honestly, around my junior year, you kind of get to that point where as an entrepreneur, you just get kind of like itchy. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but you're like, what am I doing with my life, right? Like I'm spending all this money to learn these things and I'm not making any money. And so kind of a weird time where I'm proud of myself that I stuck it out, right? Like I finished the degree, but like I was very tempted to like jump ship and like go do something else. But finished the degree, had an opportunity to work at Union Pacific, and all this will have a point. We're kind of getting there, but it's a long story to get there. Started working at Union Pacific in their management training program, which was great. As an engineer, we don't always have the best people skills, right? Social skills. And so it was a great opportunity to just focus on the people, how to run a business, how to manage people, your public speaking skills, right? So they flew us all over the country. I met with a bunch of different shops, learned how to manage a team, lead, all those types of great things. So it was a really great experience. I got a year through the program, graduated from the program at Union Pacific, but then was asking myself, why did I do all this school, right? Technically in engineering, if I'm just going to be a manager. So jumped ship from Union Pacific and worked at a startup in Florida who did product development. And it was a crazy chaotic environment. So it was a good thing for me, but I went from like a really stable job where we worked 4/10s, right? So I had 3-day weekends every week, really solid paycheck at Union Pacific, right? Really defined corporate structure, right? Easy to know where you fit into kind of the cog of the machine. So I went from that to a startup where you didn't really know if you were going to get paid week to week. Your hours were whatever needed to get done to move the projects forward. Your role was really whatever needed to happen to get things done. So very structured environment, very chaotic environment. I learned a lot from both. And the chaotic environment is where I kind of got more introduced to this idea of intellectual property and the ability to tie yourself in long-term to the revenue of a project by putting in a tremendous amount of short-term effort upfront, right? So typically, right, if you had a lot of capital, you could do that by just investing in the company, right? Coming in and say, hey, I'll give you $100,000 for 20% of your company. I assume we've all seen Shark Tank, right? Something like that. But starting out, right, I didn't have $100,000 to invest in these companies. So putting my time, my effort, my technical expertise into it sounded like a way that I could capture that same type of long wealth generation, right, that you might see from a typical investor, that I could do that early on with my technical experience. So that kind of like planted the seed for BAM Innovation to come years down the line. Yeah, so in Florida, working at this product development startup, great opportunity, super chaotic, ended up in a position where wasn't getting paid enough to survive, right, just logistically, right? And so I went to my boss and said, hey, could we work out something to pay me a little bit more? And he said, no, right? And so I was like, dang, what am I gonna do? So kind of in the background of all that, I've been applying to graduate school back at BYU. I had a couple years kind of out of the university, so the itch that I had as an undergraduate student was kind of gone. I realized what the real world was like, realized that a few more technical skills would be really helpful if I did want to start investing in companies with my time and effort and skill versus with my resources. And so I guess that's one definition of resources, right? So I'd been accepted to BYU contingent on finding an advisor for my graduate research. And so it was kind of like, you can come, but you have to convince somebody, one of the professors at the university, that they want to take you on as a graduate student, which is kind of like a strong maybe, right? It's like, maybe you can come back to school. So after I'd had my talk with my boss in Florida, jumped ship, came back to Utah, and I believe it was, let's see, I'm trying to remember this correctly. I think the day that I had my conversation with my boss in Florida, and he told me, basically, we're not going to pay you enough money to stick around, I got a call from one of the professors, so Dr. Blotter at BYU, and he had an open position for some of his studies looking at whole body vibrations' effect on the human body. So I was like, well, I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't really know a whole lot about the human body, but if you'll take me as a graduate student, this sounds like a great opportunity. So the day that one opportunity kind of failed, I had another one to open up, so came back to school at BYU, and while I was going to school, I had my first success, and just kind of as an FYI, peppered throughout here, there's like a million favors, right, or failures. There's opportunities that I missed, there's contracts that I should have signed, there's so many things that didn't go right, but it did lead to this point. And I had my first success in actually licensing one of my own products. So the product was a, does anybody know anybody who does quilting in here or does quilting? So my mom's a big quilter, right? She has a big long arm quilting machine. And as part of the quilting process, they have rotary cutters, which is basically just a way to cut the fabric. And yeah, pizza cutter for fabric. That's a great explanation for it. And so I came up with a little guard for the cutter that could be placed over the blade so that if you were to cut yourself, it would minimize the damage and basically virtually eliminate the potential for cutting off the tips of your fingers. It's kind of crazy, but a lot of these little old ladies doing quilting, they'll cut off the tips of their fingers with these rotary cutters. So I developed the product, set up the manufacturing, found a distributor who was actually interested in the idea, and I had my first success licensing a product to them. So I'm tied into some percentage of their sales. So that was a really great day for me. And then over the next couple of years, I've received exactly $0 in licensing revenue from this product. So it kind of taught me a lesson of even if you have a good idea, even if you work through all these processes and get it licensed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to automatically be successful, which is a good lesson to learn. But yeah, definitely it did not sway my conviction in the idea that I could still be successful on this path, if that makes sense. Okay. And then all of that gave me experience with intellectual property, right? So I had a patent filed on that first product, worked through a patent attorney to file a non-provisional patent, and then eventually ended up with a patent granted. So I have a US patent that's in my name. That's super exciting. Technically, you could say it's not worth very much, but it's emotionally worth a lot to me right now. So it sits downstairs kind of on my desk, and I look at it. So reminds me that it's worth it, reminds me that I can do these types of things. And then, so let's see, where are we at? So Utah, came back to graduate school. Graduate school was great, learned a lot. Dr. Blotter was a great advisor. Did my research on whole body's vibrations effect on cognition in humans, specifically in inhibitory control. A bunch of fancy words to basically say there's a very small effect. So if you're sitting in a tractor, right, driving through the field, and you need to hit the brake, it was such a small change that it's not really worth worrying about it, but the frequency of the vibration that you experience does affect your ability to hit that brake, or to have a signal that says hit the brake over and over and over again, have a different signal that says hit the gas, and then you accidentally hit the brake. It was a terrible explanation of my research, but the takeaway is that you don't need to worry about it, basically. So don't worry about the vibrations in the tractor affecting your ability to control that tractor. While I was there, worked at Rustica. So Rustica was they manufacture barn doors for inside the house, not for your typical barn door, but kind of the aesthetic barn doors that go inside. Got a lot more experience developing products, transitioned in kind of the operations side of things, helped them build up their infrastructure, their incoming order processing. We automated the bill of material generation, so that was a really fun project. Got really experienced with kind of the operations side of it, helped kind of manage some of their teams. And then my wife was working at the time, and I kind of got that itch again where I was like, okay, this is great, but all these other projects and things that I want to do, right, this BAM innovation that I want to start is still kind of just sitting in the back, going full speed with it yet. So my wife at the time had a really great job, and so I said, okay, this is a great time, right? She's working, we don't have any kids yet, we have one on the way coming next month, but we didn't have any yet. And I said, okay, if I'm gonna take the leap, now is the time to do it. So I quit my really good job, a job that had done a lot of good things for me and opened up a lot of opportunities, and started BAM Innovation. I had one client to start, and I thought, oh, like I'm just gonna knock out this project, I'm gonna have all this time. But when you're doing product development, you end up with a lot of, I don't wanna call it downtime, but just in between time, where you'll develop something, you'll send it out to maybe get prototyped or to get manufactured, or you'll send out a bunch of quotes, and you're just waiting, right? You're waiting for that information to come in. So very quickly I realized I didn't have enough work, so we focused on marketing myself, networking, ended up with about 5 clients, which is great. Right now I was busy all the time, and then my wife ended up losing her job. Her company did mass layoffs. They cut off like the most recent 10% of hires that had come in. They were the people that were let go. So now neither one of us had a job. My business model doesn't have a lot of money coming in up front, so we're basically making $0 again, right? That's great, fantastic, just what we wanted to have happen. So I guess the point of all that is like entrepreneurship is a journey. Things don't go the way that you want them to, even if things look perfect, right? Like I thought, we could do this for years because my wife's got this great job. Things are gonna change. So when she lost her job, I had to finish up a couple projects as quickly as I can, applied for a job in Sandy, Utah, got a project management job down there, and it was, how do you phrase this? It was a great job, but it was terrible, right? So like it had everything that you needed for like security, good pay, good benefits. It was a little far away, and it was just far enough away that if there was traffic, your 30, 40-minute commute could then like double, right? So you went from sitting in traffic for about a half an hour to maybe an hour, hour and a half. And so all of the BAM innovation stuff kind of had to go on the back burner again, which is super frustrating because now I have clients, right? And they're like, how are things going? What'd you get done last month? And it's like, nothing, right? That's not a great update to your client if you've ever been in that position, right? Okay. And so we had that job for about 3 months. And then I saw on LinkedIn a post about the BYU Tech Transfer having a new open position for a licensing specialist. And I was looking at kind of my history, right, all the things that I just told you about, and I'm like, what they're looking for is literally what I have, right? Experience in contract negotiation, great. I did that when I was at the product design company in Florida, right? I negotiated my own contract, I negotiated contracts with third parties. Experience with IP, great. Licensed my own product, I have a patent, I understand that process. I'm not a licensing, or I'm not a intellectual property expert, but I at least understand what we're looking for when we're looking at an IP potential. They wanted product design experience. Great, I have a business, I've done product design. I've launched several successful products into the market. And then, so it all kind of lined up that I, through my experiences and through my journey, had the skills that were necessary for this job. So went in, applied for the job, got offered the position, and that's now where I work full time. And it's a much better job to work in concert with BAM Innovation. It's a lot closer. So now I had to limit my number of clients from about 5 down to maybe 2 or 3 that I can take on at a time. And to give you kind of a snapshot into what my days look like right now. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, go into entrepreneurship, it doesn't really matter what you go into. Like the guarantee is that you're going to be busy beyond belief, right? Like you're just going to be so exhausted working on things all the time. So my days are typically, I wake up early in the morning. I almost always have something printing on the 3D printer throughout the night, doing some prototyping. So I'll go downstairs, check on that, check emails, make sure everything's looking good, go to work, right? Work all day, come home, see my wife, have dinner, go downstairs, and then spend 3, 4, try to limit it to 3 or 4, but some days, some nights get away from me. 3 or 4 hours working on customer client projects, following up on quotes that were sent the day before, so supply chain stuff, setting up meetings for either the weekends or the evenings with clients or with suppliers or with assembling teams, right? All those types of things. And so basically you go from having a 9 to 5 to really it's like a 6 to 11 some nights, right? Anyways, you're working a lot, right? But it's great because in my mind, this is the opportunity that I want to have, right? I want to get 10 years from now, be able to come back in this room and say, remember when I was talking to this group of students? You guys probably won't be here, but maybe I can talk to these guys, right? And I can say, remember when I was here talking about the things that I was doing to try and be successful and how much work it was? And now all of those things are successful, right? We've launched a dozen companies that have just been incredibly successful. That licensing revenue that when I was here last was $0 is now, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if entrepreneurship is about anything, it's about betting on yourself, right? Betting on yourself that you can do the things and make things happen for yourself to be successful. And success can be defined however you want, but having some sort of monetary goal in there tends to make sense for me at least. Okay, what questions do you guys have? I feel like I'm just boring you, talking about my life. There's got to be a couple questions.
We've got about 15 minutes just to give you.
Okay, fantastic.
So,
Yeah.
do you do all sorts of range of products that you go through, or is there like a kind of area of products you kind of focus, like medical products or day-to-day products? What is that?
Yeah, so I'm super open to whatever. My skill set lends itself more to mechanical-based products with some electrical assembly and software development. So we can do most anything. Developing a video game would probably just honestly be beyond my skill set, right? I have developed a game for like an app on your phone, super simple, but didn't really involve a lot of like hard coding. But So for the chiller, for example, it's a mechanical system, it has electronics in it. I designed the PCB, so the printed control board, printed circuit board. I designed the software, at least the first iteration. I had somebody help me with the graphics. I'm not a great graphic artist, so that's one thing I usually just pay people to help me with. They can do it a lot faster than me. And then I had to clean up the code that they helped me with because they had made a couple mistakes. So coding, mechanical, electrical is all well within my kind of wheelhouse of comfortability. But really, what I have found is that I want to build the skills that allow you to achieve whatever it is that you want to work on. Right? So if you had a product, I could probably figure it out for you, or at least connect you with the individuals that could.
Do you anticipate that narrow?
I don't know. It's hard to know. Early on, it was hard to find clients, right? Just like nobody knows who you are, and nobody really wants to take a risk on kind of this unknown entity. But the longer I've been in the industry and the more contacts I've made, I actually have a list of people just waiting on standby now because I don't have enough time. And so definitely at some point I'll either need to pivot and specialize, right, in something that I can do a little bit faster and a little bit more streamlined, or I'll need to bring in a few more people to help with kind of the breadth of the projects that we bring in. Either way is good to me. Yeah. Yeah.
So we work a lot with students who have ideas.
Mhm.
What do you typically suggest to someone when they come in and meet with you the first time? You know, what does your process look like, and what would you suggest to someone who has an idea? How do you start actually building it or figuring out what does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the idea a little bit. My first recommendation to every client that comes in is like kill your bad ideas early, right? And just be realistic with your novelty and uniqueness. Sometimes people come in and they're like, I've had an idea that nobody's ever had before. Go, great, let's type it into Google, right? There's 50 people offering your idea. Now that doesn't mean it's a bad product. It doesn't mean you can't make money from it. It doesn't mean that you can't be incredibly successful with that exact idea. But you do need to be realistic with what is the competition, what's the market space look like, do I need to even file a patent, right? If there's 30 other companies doing the exact same thing, okay, I don't need to waste money on a patent, right? So first step is just where are you, what's your goals, where are you at, being realistic and kind of maybe bringing them back down to earth a little bit. So there's not so much pie in the sky, this is the $1 billion idea, but maybe it's $1 million idea, that's great, right? Maybe it's a $10 million idea. But just being realistic with them. And then once we have them kind of back down to earth, we talk about structurally, okay, what's going on with your project? What kind of components can we get off the shelf? What kind of things are going to need to be custom made? Timelines, how long is it going to take to work through some of these things? What I need from them, right? So feedback as we're doing the design and the aesthetics of it. What's important to you? What's not important to you? I can't tell you how many projects I've had that kind of grind to a halt because the client can't make a decision about if it needs to be like sharp and angular or like nice and round, or the feedback that they give me is, well, I don't like it. Okay, great. What don't you like about it, right? What specifically so that I can make changes? Oh, just the feel of it, right? The feel of it isn't right. Okay, what do you do with that feedback, right? So helping them understand what that feel means and a little bit of back and forth can be helpful. So yeah, just kind of laying out the timeline for them, making sure that they understand how long it might take, obstacles, and then budget, right? What kind of budget do they have to work with? Because I tend to be fairly cheap up front, but it doesn't mean that we can make the product without spending anything. Okay.
Do you guys understand how he's making money? I know he explained, but does it make sense to you guys where his compensation is coming from? He's taking equity, some small money, but then equity in the company. So if the company's not successful, he's not getting paid.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yep. And instead of risking capital, right, by investing in the company directly, I'm basically risking time. So I could get, hopefully 10 years from now, incredibly successful, right? But I could get 5 years from now and I've basically given up all my weekends, all my nights, all my time in exchange for what amounts to nothing. That'd be a little sad, but as an entrepreneur, you kind of get used to rejection. Kind of as a separate side project, I wrote a book about my experiences growing up on the ranch in Florida. I've sent it to hundreds and hundreds of agents and editors. I have a whole folder that's just dedicated to rejection letters, hundreds of rejection letters, right? So if you're not comfortable with rejection, if you're too scared to ask the question because you're worried about being rejected, like you will never be successful. So as an entrepreneur, you have to just be very willing to step out, put yourself out there, ask the question, ask for the contract, ask for equity in the company. Whatever it is that you're doing, if you're not bold enough to ask the question and get rejected, you'll never have the opportunity to be successful.
Do you reject clients?
Yes, I do. For a lot of different reasons, right? One of the probably primary ones is just unrealistic with their expectations, right? So if they come in and say, hey, I've got this super simple project, should take about a couple weeks, right? And I expect us to have like mass manufacturing in place. It's like, well, let me try to help you understand, right? Here's some of the issues with it. I don't know about this, right? This is gonna be custom. It's gonna be at least a month to get the quote. And early on, you can pretty easily tell the good clients, right? The ones that are gonna be willing to work with you and have realistic expectations. Maybe they've launched a product before, so they understand the time that it's gonna take, versus those who just have never done it before, have no understanding, and are unwilling to listen to kind of your advice on how things might go in the future. So yeah, we do reject clients from time to time. Okay, a couple other thoughts that I have. We still have a few minutes, right? So let's see. I had one thought when I was driving down, that every successful person that I know, what's the best way to talk about this? So sometimes you'll see somebody and they're very successful, right? And then you'll get with your group of friends and you're talking about them and you're like, man, they just got lucky, right? They got lucky that they invested in this company at such and such time right before it took off, right? Or they got lucky that so-and-so who's selling that property down the street, like they bumped into each other and he just got lucky that he was successful with those things, right? It's very tempting to attribute other people's success to luck, right? But I think what I've learned is that luck as an entrepreneur is when opportunity meets preparation, right? So as an example of that, if I were to make an offer to this class today and say, anybody who can give me $10,000 by the end of today, I will guarantee to give you $100,000 by the end of the year, right? 10x return on your investment. Maybe don't raise your hands on this one, but who could take advantage of that opportunity, right? Either who has that cash in their bank account or who could go find somebody to get that cash, to get that return, right? That would trust them enough to invest $10,000 for them. This happens all the time in business, right? Where you'll look at people and say, well, they just got lucky that they had that opportunity, or they got lucky they bumped into that person. But it took years and years of preparation and planning to take advantage of those opportunities when they come up. So sometimes those overnight successes, right, or those people that got lucky, that overnight success was 10 years in the making, right? But you saw the last 3 years or the last 3 months when they actually finally hit that tipping point and tipped into success. So just keep that in mind, right? I use it for myself, just to remind myself not to judge other successful people, right? That I don't know what happened, right? And even though it looks lucky to me, I don't know what kind of effort went into that. And also remind myself now that all the work that goes into what I'm doing day to day right now, right? If I'm consistent with it, I'm gonna be around for those opportunities. I'm gonna be able to take advantage of them because I'm putting in that preparation right now. Okay. Okay, a couple other things, yeah.
I had a question about what you can share, what you were going to share.
No, go ahead.
I was curious what your thoughts and opinions were on crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and yeah, just what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah, so I think they're incredibly useful as a tool. You definitely want to make sure you understand your IP situation before you do that. So if you publicly disclose your inventions, they become public domain if you don't have IP in place. The United States is really nice that you can file for a provisional patent, which is basically just a placeholder that says at this date and time, I had this idea and I'm working on filing a patent, but I haven't filed it yet. So if you want a low-cost way, those are typically about $130 for a small entity. You can throw a provisional on your idea, do some crowdfunding, right, generate some revenue, and then circle back and pay for the non-provisional patent. Great within the US. Internationally, though, if it's disclosed publicly, like that's the date. There is no provisional filing. So if you disclose it without a patent prosecution in place internationally, you lose all of your international patent rights. Now, pros and cons, right? If you have no ability or interest in selling internationally, really doesn't matter, right? So yeah, and we deal with that a lot at BYU, right? Like, where do we want to file? When do we want to file? Can they give a presentation on this at the conference, or do we need to get a provisional in place before they go and then look at the non-provisional filing? So specifically crowdfunding, I think it's a fantastic tool. Just make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. And then there's lots of horror stories about crowdfunding, right? Where they'll raise a bunch of money and then spend that money or promise to give, early access to the game or the product or the device, and then they're not able to do it, right? They were either undercapitalized or they spent the money poorly, and now they end up in these weird legal situations where they owe a bunch of people products, right? But they don't have the ability to deliver. So just be careful with it. And as a student, you actually have access to a lot of different kind of forms of capital. So I'm not as familiar with what goes on here, other than I know there's a pitch competition, and I saw a sign outside that said $500 for the winner. It's $500 of free money, right? If you're not in the pitch competition, go do it. It's good for you no matter what. But at BYU, more specifically, they have a lot of just validation grants, a lot of different competitions. We just had the Student Innovator of the Year, where one of our licensees who licensed technology from the university won $10,000 to help continue growing their business, right? So again, not as familiar with the ecosystem here, but I can basically guarantee you that there's things like that here. And if you come up to BYU, I'll make some introductions for you, and you can participate up there as well, right? So great opportunities as a student that really dry up very quickly when you're no longer a student, right? The second you graduate and you go apply for a student validation grant, they're going to go, do you go to school here? Well, I did. Too bad. So take advantage of it now when you're a student, for sure. Okay. Yeah.
So this is kind of a big question. I don't know if you can get into all of it. I've had some negative experiences with patent enforcement
Yes.
and intellectual property. So I know you talked a lot about the importance of patents, trademarks, those things. Like, what's the question? I guess often our approach here, I've seen students get slowed down by the fear of, I don't know how to do a patent, that scares me, or that seems really expensive. So sometimes we talk about a provisional patent.
Yeah.
How do you balance like momentum with testing an idea, getting something out there, versus the protection possibly that can come with intellectual property?
Yeah. So with any kind of like, the best advice that I can give is look at it from a business perspective, right? If all of your capital early on is going to be tied up in filing for a patent and you can't actually make the product or market it or produce it or sell it or any of those things because you're just going after this patent, probably not worth it, right? Similarly, if you don't have the capital or the ability to prosecute infringers of your patent, is it really worth it, right? Maybe, maybe not. So the best advice that I can give is just strategically, you're going to find a sweet spot for your business and your situation. So if you're a student, you maybe have enough capital to make the product, but not secure the intellectual property. Are you worried about somebody knocking you off? Maybe. But at the end of the day, if you can still make a business, scale it fairly quickly, be the first to market, even without a patent, and make a business that's generating between $100 to maybe $1 million in revenue every year, and then sell that company, right? Like, even without a patent, there's still a really good case to be made that you can still be successful. So it's always hard, right? Because people will come to me all the time at BYU and very specific questions about what should I do in this situation. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't own your business, right? You need to do whatever's best for your business. There's pros and cons to every situation. You can spend a lot of money on patent prosecution, right? Just within the US, probably anywhere between 10 to 60K for a non-provisional patent. And that's just, within the US. If you do internationally, it's easy to spend $250,000 just on patenting costs. Blink of an eye, right? So if you have that kind of capital, great. That can be a great thing. But again, if you're not willing to prosecute, then that's another thing, right? So even if you can spend the money on the patent and get it, if you're not willing to prosecute anybody for infringing, again, it may be not worth it for you. It's a very vague answer to a very specific question, but that's kind of what I got. Okay.
I think that's all of our time.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone.